Okay, so welcome again. So now, after having presented the Edge screw model 3D, I want to show you a very nice application which was done by Christophe Després in France. He was my first student I had as a PhD student. He's a brilliant student. He was a brilliant student, now he's professor. And this was about fatigue crack initiation and propagation in stainless steel. And so it means that I will show you how we can build such a structure here, and what is it made of, and how could this could be related to crack initiation and propagation. Okay? So, to start with, this was a PhD that was, the grant was coming from the nuclear energy community in France. Typically, this was a serious problem they had. I think this was happened in 98, you see, what they call the CIVO problem. This happened when they wanted to stop nuclear power plant, so they had to inject some cold water into the hot secondary system. I say sleep system, not sleep system, secondary cooling system. Okay, so this creates some turbulence inside the pipe when you inject some cold fluid inside the hot fluid. There is some turbulence. Then locally your pipe is loaded in fatigue because it is locally dilated when it's high temperature. And when you have cold temperature, it is contracted. So you just continuously deform your materials every time you have some bubbles going in the vicinity of your pipe. So this creates some fatigue load conditions in your pipe inside. This is made in stainless steel, A16, 316L. And if you look at the surface, you see a lot of transgranular cracks network like that. You see some big cracks. Those cracks are very bad, of course, and there was a leak typically at that time, which was observed, and then this is very bad for nuclear engineering. Of course, to have a leak in the cooling system is not acceptable. So the origin of the PhD was to understand why such a crack appear. So why do they appear, and when? Okay, this was the objective of the PhD. Now, more recently, we also continue on this work again with Christophe, and we look at how the crack could propagate. So this I will show tomorrow. Okay. Just today, I will just show you when they appear, and tomorrow we'll see how they move, okay, well, how they propagate after they have been nucleated. So if you do some experiments, so this is what they were doing in Atomic Energy Commissariat in Paris, in France. So they have I would say, ideal testing machine, where there is a cooling system, so cooling water coming like that, continuously. And at the periphery, they impose some heat by coil, induction coil. So this will load the specimen in temperature, and then you will have some stresses. And so you cyclically heat and heat down and heat up and down and heat up your specimen with that. This is called CICA, like cyclage thermique par induction des aciers. This is a CICLA device. And if you look at the stress that you use in your material during that loading conditions, it looks like that. You can use a simple FEM model, which was fitted on a stainless steel. This was a G2 model, by the way. It's not crystal plasticity, it's a very simple model. But it was nicely producing the tensile experiments and the cyclic experiments, so we are confident it works. And with that model, we were looking at what is typically the state of this node here, the first size of elements at the outer part of the pipe, when the temperature is minimum or when it is maximum. And you see this is the stress level, so it is oscillating. First you start here, and then there is a cycle here. And during the cycle, if you compute the plastic strain, you have a very small plastic strain, which is like that, which is oscillating between 1 and 3, 10 minus 3. You don't see it clearly here, but it's 10 to minus 3, so it's 0.3%. It's very small deformation. So this is very good for dislocation dynamics. 0.3%, this is something I can achieve, okay? So we are happy with that. Now, just one remark. This device here, the crack will appear at the outer part of the tube, not inside the tube like in reality. Because of these loading conditions, this one will be cracked, not that one. Okay. So we look at what happens at this place experimentally. And so numerically first we saw that this is the loading, and also we can see that the stress state is equibiaxial. So it means that you have the same stress level any direction in the plane, plus another one out of the plane. So it looks like that, sigma, sigma, and out of the plane you have 0, because it's a free surface. So you have a equibiaxial stress tensor, okay? Like that. Very simple one. Amplitude is 10 minus 3. Okay? So if you take out from the specimen of TEM fin foil, so this was a TEM investigation from my colleague Christian Robertson. in Saclay. So he took out a fin foil from the outer part of the pipe, and he was able to observe some structure of the dislocation, large dislocation structure, and you can see some wall like that. This is typical of fatigue. This is called it's a persistent slip band, and you have this here, which looks like what they call ladder-like. It's a ladder-like structure. You see, it looks like a ladder you are climbing on. You see you have your ladder structure with the bands here. This is typically a persistent slip band formed in that specimen. So it means that the loading condition corresponds to fatigue, indeed. Now, so I pointed out here, if you investigate the whole set of dislocations that could be active due to the loading, and so to do that, what he did is that we have the loading conditions using FEM. Using TM and DBSD, he was able to give the local orientation of the grain. And using the orientation of the grain, we can compute all the Schmidt factors, so the resolved shear stress you have on the 12 slip systems of your specimen, if you apply 1 megapascal, if you apply this sigma. So the resolved shear stress look like that, okay? And you see that some of systems are heavily loaded, like these two, some are not loaded like that. And the dislocation he observed in the TM, he did the GB analysis, and he was looking at their character, and we found that they belong to those two slip systems here. So there are two families of dislocation, mainly. You have a few others, but those are the main dislocations on system number 7 and 8. And what? Excuse me? How what? How they are what? Oh, so this Professor Sundaraman explained last time. To recognize the character of the dislocations, you need to look at one single dislocation, rotate your specimen so that you distinguish your dislocation with the J, the diffraction orientation. When J.B equal to 0, you know that you are in certain conditions. You have to do that for all orientations, and with I think 4 pictures. Or I don't. Okay, so this is so it's a long job. It's a 1-day analysis for a single picture like that to do that. It's very long. But at the end of the day, he got this information, which is very important for us. So he said that this is the one I see in my experiment. And those two, if you look at them carefully, these are orders with my 3D convention. So it's always screw edge. So this is 2 slip systems with the same Burgers vector. So Burgers vector is bar 101 here, for example. This 011 Burgers vector, bar 110, and this one has 110 Burgers vector. So they have the particularity, the specificity of these two is that they share the same Burgers vector, and they have also something which is more or less the same loading. The loading condition is similar. You would say that those also are not so different. That's true. But this is not the one he observed there. I will explain later on why it's normal not to observe that one. But this is the one he observed, okay? This is just constatation. We found that. So let's go further. Now, if you look at the surface, how is looking the surface of your specimen after a few cycles? This after 1,000 cycles, 1,200 cycles. By the way, this is low cycle fatigue. We call it low cycle fatigue. It means that the loading is quite big, although we are just imposing 0.1%. This is 0.1% plastic strain. So it's not high cycle fatigue. This is low cycle fatigue. It is the life is quite short. Okay. So if we look at the surface, we see these typical things here. Of course, you see very nasty things because of corrosion. It's high temperature. So you have some oxide at the surface, and the oxide goes out and it makes some nasty things. But although that, you can see the profile here, which is the typical of a bond, similar to what we saw this morning with the channeling in irradiated materials, similar things. But here, this is not channeling. This is because of persistent slip bond, because of this guy here. There is some extrusion or intrusion which are formed at the surface. And if you look at the profile along the line, you see that initially you have something like 35 nanometers height of the extrusion. And with the cycle, 200 cycles later, it's up to 59 nanometers. So it means that this thing is always increasing. There is an increase of this relief at the surface with the cycling. Okay? So something happened here. There's an extrusion relief which is always moving with time. It looks like it is bigger and bigger. So to analyze that, we will use 3Ds. I don't need to go in details on that. You know what it is. We changed the line into a succession of edge and screw segments, like that. Then we will compute the stresses. You know how it works now. Then we move your dislocations. You are able to compute your dislocation structure. And also some deformation mesh. This I didn't explain yet. because tomorrow you will have a special lecture dedicated to boundary conditions. I will explain how you can compute displacement out of DD. You can compute the steps out of a DD picture. Okay? And typically when you do that, you are able to do things like this, nano indentation that I will show tomorrow, where you have the steps at the surface. And typically I can do that. This was to answer a question we had yesterday. Here, if I put two slip systems, you see, which are equivalently loaded, which we call it double glide configuration. You have the same shear on the two slip systems. You can see that by summation of the two shear, you can accommodate some tension. It is a highly symmetric conditions. It's like if I was loading on my standard triangle on the axis between B4 and C3. Remember yesterday? If I just pull between the two, so the two systems are active the same way, then they behave like that. You have two shears, and this way you can accommodate tension. Okay? But you see the steps at the surface computed with the subroutine. I will explain tomorrow how to do that. If you want to use in ParaView, in Paradis, for example, there is some trick on that. I will explain tomorrow. Okay? So that's the tool. You know that, so I go fast. Now, let's adapt that to the fatigue problem. It's not direct. First thing to do is we'll take a grain, that is called a surface grain. It means that one of the surface of the grain is free. It's a free surface where the dislocation will go out, so that we hope to see the extrusion at that surface later on. Okay? So this is the top surface. It is a free surface. Then we will put in that dislocation box, in the simulation volume, a dislocation source here. A single one, 8 or 7, one of the two that my colleague saw, with this Burgers vector. So either slip system number 6 or 7 or 8, I'm sorry, 7 or 8, and let them move. I will also put some grain boundaries here. So what I call grain boundaries is just facets, so that dislocation cannot go through. They will be stopped at that place, and when they unload, they can come back. This is not exactly how it happens in reality. In reality, of course, when dislocation reaches a boundary, sometimes it could split there and stay there. In my case, it will just be stopped and can go back. Okay, that's an assumption. We can change that. But we didn't want to introduce a new parameter. So it was just an obstacle, one unidirectional obstacle. You could release them when you unload. So grain boundary, free surface, and single dislocations. And we put that inside. Of course, we will have cross slip. We will have all these features, all what I explained. No climb here. Just conservative motion. Then we will apply a quasi-static loading. So I mean that I will continuously increase the stress. So I am starting here. I increase a bit the stress. I wait for dislocation to stabilize. I increase more. I wait. I increase more. I wait. Up to the moment I reach this amount of plastic strain, typically 3, 10 minus 3, the one I'm looking for. When I reach that value, I will decrease the stress, and so on. And then I look what is the cycle, and so on. So this is the loading condition. It's stress control conditions, quasi-static. Okay? Then the output will be numerous. First thing, of course, will be the dislocation microstructure. What do you develop here? Then the mechanical response, this cycle here. Then locally, we'll have the deformation of the surface, extrusion. Do I have extrusion? Then internal stresses. Is there any place where a crack could initiate? If I compute the stress, then I may be able to check if a crack could be nucleated at that place. Okay? So this is typical of a simulation. So this one, we investigated two situations. The first one is when you have a stress. P is the plane where you put your first dislocations. We call it primary. It's the primary plane. And D is the deviate plane. This is typical of FCC. FCC, because of the Thomson tetrahedra, if you apply a pure shear on the system, for example, this green one, I push this Burgers vector like that, with a pure shear, I will get a third of it on the deviate system. Because it's not perpendicular, there is an angle here. So because I'm shearing there, here this one is also a little bit activated, but a third of it. So there is a three times ratio between the primary and the deviate system. So the deviate is a little bit loaded, but much less than the first one. So this is what we call single slip anyway, because you have a pure one which is highly loaded, and the second one which is not much loaded. And this gives this structure very quickly. If you take out from this structure a dislocation microstructure, like some experimentalists are frequently doing, they take this out of their TEM observation. This is how it looks like. It looks like a very planar structure, very collinear planes like that, which corresponds to the primary plane. And inside the plane, you can see some dislocation organization into cells. You have some cells, some patterning here, which is not random. It's quite complicated. I cannot tell you why it's like that. But you can see some ladder-like structure. You have the ladders of the structure leading to a persistent slip bond. It's very similar to it's typical of fatigue. We do see a fatigue feature here in this very planar structure. And just to convince you, if you look in literature, you will see similar patterns. For example, from the Czech group here, you see some very planar structure when they were applying a pure shear cyclic load on this sample. Their cells are a little bit maybe more defined than ours, just because they went to higher number of cycles, but it's much similar. So to start with, we say, okay, the code can do something in fatigue. At least we have some self-organization of the dislocations that may be realistic. So we say, okay, we can believe something is happening there. Let's go for the mechanical behavior. Is it also correct or not? So now if we look at the mechanical response, this is where I'm starting at that point. I have a single dislocation. So that's not enough to accommodate the plasticity I want. I need many mobile density. Rho m should be big enough to accommodate the plastic strain I want. So initially you need to have a big stress to multiply your dislocation a lot with Frank-Ruhl mechanism up to that place where you reached what you expect. Then you unload that way. And then very quickly you have a constant saturated cycle. We call it a saturated cycle where the stress does not change much. The big and low stress are more or less constant. Okay? So the first cycle is artificial, I would say, just because I have a single dislocation. And then the last one, you can rely, they are reliable. If you pick out this value here, 200 megapascal, you plot it here. It compares very well with these experiments from Lee and Laird in the single crystal for the same conditions, same load conditions, one of the strain amplitude. And we did more from that. For example, we tested more and more, and this is the DD points we found if you change the plastic strain amplitude. In DD, it's very easy to change that. In experiments, it's more complicated. So here we have 4 simulations. You can see how they are located in that curve. The continuous curve here, just for your information, was done by Lee and Laird also. At the beginning, they imposed a given plastic strain, this one, and then this plastic strain amplitude was continuously increasing with the deformation. So it's a continuous increase of your plastic strain, and you can see that the stress in that case is a bit lower than if you impose that directly from the beginning. I am clear? Am I clear like that? So it means either you start with this amount of fatigue plastic strain, or like this. If you increase slowly your plastic strain amplitude, you will follow this stress level, the saturation stress level. If now you start from the beginning at this amplitude, you will get a stress a little bit higher. Okay? Okay, that's experiments. Today we are just doing the same curve as this. I have a student at the lab who is working on that. He's not Indian, by the way, he's Chinese, this one, working on this. Okay? So this is for single slip. So now we say, okay, thanks to that, the mechanical also is not bad. Let's check another loading state, and this loading state is where when you have the same stress on the 2 slip systems. So it means that you are loading exactly the same way, one system and the next. So those two are loaded the same way. So it's what we call double glide configuration, okay? And this corresponds to the orientation that Christian Robertson observed in his experiments. So this is more like in textbook. In literature, you will find a lot of shear stress fatigue tests. This one is more related to our experiments that we wanted to look at in these typical tubes, okay? And in this case, what did you find? This is the DD simulations. You can see two bands or 2 families of planes which are very close. This is not a single plane, okay? You have a kind of thickness. You can see the thickness here. So you have a plane which is thickened, like that. And you have a second plane here which is quite thick also. And this compares well to the TEM pictures my colleague did. You can see the cell size is similar. See, this is 1 micron, this is 200 nanometers. I should rescale, but they match quite well. Okay? So this is what I would call a preliminary study, from which we say, okay, we can be confident about the dislocation microstructure and also about the mechanical response. One more comment. Here, the mechanical response, you see it's 300 megapascal. This one is only 200 megapascal. The amplitude is the same. Why is this bigger? Do you know why this one is a lot bigger than that one? Because of cross-hardening, exactly, yes. Remember, we spoke about this hardening matrix. Now, here you had a single system, a little bit of the second one, but very few, active. So it's like pure shear. few forest dislocation. Here, both are moving at the same time, so, and of course, they interact a lot, and it's harder to move. And this is the hardening that you observe here. Okay. And which junction is between the two? What is the junction between those two systems here? What is the nature of the junction? I told you that we are dealing with a slip system here, and the one in the deviate plane. So this junction, what is it? It is the collinear junction, right? Collinear because they have the same Burgers vector. So it's a very strong junction. You see, it's this one and this one. This is the collinear junction. It means that when they meet, they can change their neighbor, okay? And it's a hard, if you call it a junction, as I said last time, it is very hard to destroy. The good point for that is that 3Ds can do that because it's not a glissile junction that I cannot handle. The collinear, I can do that very nicely. I just need to reconnect the neighbor. So 3Ds is okay for that. There is no artifact of 3Ds. We don't need to use a NUMODIS or a nodal code for that, okay? There is no bad effect of the edge screw modeling. So let's have a look now to the simulation. So for example, I take this double glide configuration here, and I will show you a typical movie of that. So this is here. So here the grain shape was taken as a cylinder. We investigated many shapes. I told you this student was excellent, so we had 1,000 tons of results. So here I just show a few of them. So this is the cylinder. This is the grain boundaries. This is the top free surface. This is the plastic strain amplitude, that will oscillate between 0.5 and minus 0.5, 10 minus 3. And you will see both the dislocation inside and the steps at the surface using the displacement field, as I will explain tomorrow. We compute the displacement as a post-treatment. This is not needed by 3Ds, it's just camera does it. With camera, we compute the plastic displacement. So I will show you where is the first source. You see? Here you can see that the source was located somewhere here. I'm loading in this double glide configuration. The source is emitting loops, Franklin source, you know that. The loop you can see pileups at the grain boundary, like it is here. What do you think about the Burgers vector of the source? Do you think the source was more like a screw or more like an edge, typically? What do you think for the Burgers vector of the source? The source was orientated that way, I assume. So is it screw or edge? It is edge, right? Why? Because the plastic steps you clearly see at the surface, they are like that. And the dislocation line was like this, so they are more or less perpendicular. Well, they are exactly perpendicular. So this is an edge segment, okay? So it means that what are those segments here? Those are screw collinear to the Burgers vector. And what do you see here? Cross-slip. They cross-slip. Very easily, you have the pileup. Edge cannot do anything. But the dislocation, the screw dislocation, they can cross-slip. Like I explained last time with your wet hand and the soap, because of the pileup, you are pressing of the dislocation, and very soon one will go out. Okay? So this is what happens here. So because of cross-slip, although you start with a single dislocation here, you will very quickly have dislocation everywhere. So just let me show you. Maybe I will play it twice. You see, poof. One cycle, you have dislocation everywhere. Okay? It's it's incredible. That's very good for us. I love that because it means that at that stage, I completely ignore where was my first dislocation. I don't care because it's so dense. The initial state has no effect on this stage. So you can see a huge dislocation density forming. You can see also how the shape of the volume is changing. You can see that I'm loading that way and then reverse way and so on. I can play again because I think this movie is quite nice. Okay, I play again. Poof, cross-slip, dislocation everywhere. This is good for the material point of view because it means that now the plasticity is homogeneous. If it's homogeneous, you can sustain large life. You have a big life. But now, if you go with the cycling, you go on cycling and cycling, you can see here things concentrate. It's no more homogeneous. You have less steps and they are more localized in bands. This is the band, this is another band, this is another band here. Those are the persistent slip bands. Persistent slip bands are forming here, like this, and this is bad for the material now. Because this will localize the plasticity, you clearly see a big step here, and this is very bad, and it could be the origin of a crack. Okay? So this we will check. Okay? So you can see that the code can do that quite nicely. So the conclusion from that is that initially you have cross-slip, which is spreading the plasticity. which is very good. It's homogeneous plasticity. But then you have a negative effect of that. If you look along the Burgers vector, you clearly see some bonds with a given thickness like this, which are developed where the plasticity is localized. Okay? So this is not good for the material. So, anyway, let's try to learn things about using DD. So now we can play with it. We can, for example, change the diameter of the grain, or change the plastic strain amplitude. Okay? So if I change the diameter of the grain, so here now it's no more a cylinder, it's half a tetrahedron. No, this was a decahedron, so this half a decahedron. We played a lot with this volume, you see. So this is a dodecahedron we cut into 2 parts, and this is half of it. And then it's a surface. You look from the top free surface along the Burgers vector, and you can see the 2 slip systems which are active. And if you change the diameter, multiply diameter by 1.6, you can see that the thickness is increased. It is multiplied about by 1.6 to the squared. If you double the diameter, the thickness is multiplied by 2.2 to the squared. So it's like if the thickness depends like the diameter to the squared. Okay? So this is something we, just out of the DD, we can learn that. And the distance between the bond, the average distance here, you can see that it is more or less linear with the diameter. So this is just an output we have from this statistic. Now, if we change the plastic strain amplitude, you don't thicken the bond. The bonds are more or less the same. The thickness is still the same. It's comparable. Here I have doubled the plastic strain. The size is not doubled. But the number of bonds is doubled. Here you have more bonds than here. So it means that it's like if each bond was able to accommodate a given amount of plasticity and not more. So if you need more plasticity, you need a new bond. Okay, this is what we found here. So it means also that the number of bonds is linear with the plastic strain amplitude. Or also you can say that the distance between the bonds is the reverse of the plastic strain amplitude. So this is just, let's say, a parametric study we can do very quickly. And you can get this. A simulation typically is a week. It's less than a week to get this. Okay. To give ideas. Now, how does this bond form? And this is, I think, the most important information you will get today. Because of the fatigue test, you are moving up and down dislocations, like that, and it's the reverse. So if you have a source here, another source there, they can very easily meet or glide at a very close vicinity. Then you can form what we call vein structure. You have positive, negative dislocation. This is dipoles. The dipoles you computed in the tutorial, they are located very frequently in the fatigue simulation. This is a dipole. People call it also a vein because it looks like a vein, like that. And then if you take this dipole and a dislocation is coming, a screw dislocation in the cross-slip plane. Just assume that this comes. Dislocation comes, it approaches the edge dislocation. Then it can recombine because of the collinear junction. So there can be some recombination of the line that way, okay, like this. Now if you have you go further, the dislocation will cross the second plane here, recombine again in that plane, okay. So now you have some small connection between the line on the first plane to the line on the next plane here, like that, like that, like that, the same here. So this is the effect of a shearing of your dislocation inside this vein. This is the case for a single dislocation. When you have a second one which is coming in a nearby plane, or even far away plane, if it's the opposite sign dislocation, you can make the same topography. You will see that it will lead to these guys here, these small guys, for which the Burgers vector is here, and these are the loops. What are those loops? Prismatic loops. You see, I love those guys. They are everywhere, these prismatic loops. These prismatic loops can glide in the yellow cylinder. They can glide easily, as we saw last time, okay? So these are prismatic loops. If it is the same sign dislocation which is coming, it creates half prismatic loops, which is helical turn. You have some helical turn, but the behavior is more or less similar. It means that this can glide still in that direction. In vicinity of this channel, those dislocations are highly pinned. They cannot move. They are hard to move. They are it's not sessile, but I think you could say that those are statistically stored dislocations. They cannot move. They are dead, more or less. Okay. This is what we call entangled dislocation. They are totally entangled. So this is what to remember. Finally, the bond, the persistent slip bond, will be made of channels like that, where you will have multipoles. Multipoles will be a set of prismatic loops like this. which was at where the vein was located. So the vein was here. Here now you have multiples. You have the prismatic loops, but many of them, maybe 10, 100 prismatic loops. And at different places, you have these prismatic loops. This corresponds to the ladder of the PSB that we saw experimentally. And this can go and escape toward the surface. And at that place, it may lead to extrusion. Prismatic loops, you know that it is interstitial or vacancy. It will create a punch or an extrusion at the surface. Okay? Or on this and there, just because the veins are also separated. You see, the vein structure is not everywhere. You have this dipole. This came from the initial dipoles you formed. So you had some dipoles here, another dipoles there. They cannot be at the same place because the dipole repel also each other. So there's a kind of screening effect of the dipole in the simulations. So you can have a dipole here. The next one will be at a given distance, and the one there. And when you cut with your dislocation, it will create the prismatic loops at the location where the dipole were, where the vein was. You see? So here, if you had the vein here, another then there, then you will have the prismatic loop here. But now those loops can move, so they don't stay there, they can glide, okay? But you know, did I tell you last time? For prismatic loops to move, what do I need? Prismatic loops, this segment, like this, the Burgers is like that. This is opposite to that one. So it means that if you apply the shear stress, it doesn't glide, actually, it's just getting inclined. So here, if it needs to glide, we need something. Either a change of sign, like in nano indentation, change of sign of the loading stress between the two arms. Here there is no such. Here the stress was homogeneous, so this is not the origin. So how is it gliding? I will show you. So to understand that, we need to look in dynamic. So we need to look at the surface. So this was the case now at pure shear. It's easier to analyze, but it's similar. So we make a small surface here, like I did with 3D with the stress field. I can do the same for the displacement field. I can compute the displacement on the mesh. And it looks like this. So this is the displacement at that place after 3 cycles when the plastic strain is 0. So it means that globally the surface is flat. It's globally flat surface. And then you can see it's not exactly flat. You have some positive and negative shape, but globally it is 0. And you have a starting extrusion forming here. You can see the beginning of the extrusion. You have also many steps for which the magnitude is 1 Burgers vector. So those are just one dislocation that escaped at that place. And it will be easy to remove that steps. Then you go further. Now after cycle number 8, again flat surface. You can see clearly the extrusion where the PSB is located. Here you have something which is starting to grow. We can go to cycle number 15 and cycle number 23. Today, now with the new computers, we can simulate 100 cycles. That's the maximum typically we can do in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. That gives you some orders of magnitude. So at the end, you have no more steps here. They all disappeared. And you have a big extrusion intrusion here at the surface, okay, at this cycle. So it means that everything is now localized here. So this can be very bad for the material. It's like a channeling in irradiation. It's strain localization. So let's see how it works. Now, if we look, not when it is flat, but when we are here, when it was maximum deform or minimum deform. How is it deforming? So that we can understand how this is accommodated. So here is a zebra we did in the box during the loading. Maybe you saw the movie. I think it's just plotting once. You see, hop like this. You can see that this is the bond, and you can see that the plasticity is occurring at 2 sides of the bond, there and there. You can see that you have plastic strain, located, okay, at this is the bond here. The plasticity is just localized here and there. This is another bond here. Plasticity is there and there. Okay, it's not inside the bond, but you have shear. The shear is just at the interface between the bond and the matrix. Here you have 2 bonds. You have shear there and there, shear there and there. Okay. If you zoom, this is how it looks like. The shear is localized at the interface of the bond. And this is obvious at the surface. If you look at the surface, when it is totally negative, you see a big step here and a big step there. It means that you have many mobile dislocations which have been active here. Typically a Frank-Reed source was active here and emitting many sources that will all localize the plasticity here. And when you reverse the loading, when you are in opposite state, everything will go back. It will unpile up. You are piling up and unpiling up your dislocation here at the interface. and you will create the same step, opposite sign. So it means that you have your bond, and at the interface between the bond and the matrix, you have some Frank-Reed sources, something which is highly mobile at least, which is moving up and down very easily at every cycle, okay? This, we call it mobile dislocations, mobile interface dislocations, those here, okay? So in conclusion, this is how it looks like. The persistent slip bond is made of channels like that, leading to extrusion at the surface, like this. In the channels, you have some multipoles, some dipoles, prismatic loops, let's say prismatic loops here, a set of them here. Those prismatic loops move toward the surface. So why do they move toward the surface? Because of the gliding dislocation at the interface. This is the driving force. Because now you are in the case where you have a dislocation, you have a dipole. So let's assume that you have your prismatic loops which are here, like this. Okay, 2 dislocation loops. You can have thousands of them. If in the plane here, very close to that plane, you have a Frank-Reed source which is coming. If you have a dislocation coming here, the dislocation will have a stress field. The stress field will be very high compared to the applied stress field. Locally, it could be high. So it will interact with those two and a little bit with these two, and then this will sweep your dislocation out because of the gradient. You have a gradient of stress. Now the stress is no more homogeneous. If the stress was homogeneous, this guy was going up, this guy was going down. But since this guy is coming here, it will put an extra stress on the closest of the two that will sweep your dislocation toward the surface. So the dislocations are swept by the dislocation, by the prismatic loops are swept by the mobile dislocation. Okay? This is how it propagates. It's not because of the loading, it's because of the red dislocations here. So it's a sweeping of the prismatic loops by the mobile dislocation at the interface. And in the tutorial next week, I will suggest that we will do such a thing. We will put a prismatic loop, a dislocation close to it, and see how they can interact and so on. This is one of the exercises we will do with NUMODIS, okay? And so this is what I did. So this is just taken out from this thing here. It looks like that. And between the channels, you have some entangled zone where the dislocation cannot move. They are more or less pin fixed, which stabilize the persistent slip bond. Because at that stage, I think we should not say that this is a persistent slip bond. It's what I will call more an intense slip bond, because we should demonstrate that they will remain. But I think they will, because of this tangled dislocation, they will stay there. Now, we want to compute the damage, to be sure that you have some irreversibility. So what could be the signature of irreversibility in the simulation? So irreversibility means that you do not remove what you have created at the surface. At the surface, you create some extrusion. If you have a dislocation coming and creating a step, if there is another dislocation removing the steps, this is totally reversible. If you cumulate, this is irreversible. So how could I compute that? What we decided to do is to compute a quantity that we call a surface shear, which is the total amount of plastic steps you have in your surface, like this. You project along the normal, and you divide by the total area. So it's a shear of your surface, cumulated shear of the surface. If it's positive, it means that it is one side. If it's negative, it's the opposite side. Okay? So this is the gamma. And if you look at that quantity, so it's just an integration of all extrusion, if you want. It's all the steps on the surface. And if you look at how it is, it looks like that. You have something which is increasing and decreasing with the loading, but globally it is always increasing. So it means that you have more and more steps on your surface. You are accumulating irreversibility with the cycling. And the relationship you follow is a square root relationship. It means that your irreversibility is like a square root of the number of cycles, like that. Okay? So this is for the irreversibility. And now that we have this in hand, we can change many parameters, make a new parametric study, change everything, and see which is the worst, which is good for material, which is bad for the material. So, for example, if we take 2 grain shape, here we just change the height of the grain along the Burgers vector. So we take something deep or something short. If it's short, you have this thing, h is equal 5 micron. If you double that size here, you put 10 micron now, you have something which is more irreversible. It means that it is bad for the material to have something deep. Okay? This we can understand easily. It means that if a dislocation comes out and creates a step, this step will be removed only if you have the opposite dislocation coming in the exact same plane, okay? Now if the grain is very big, your dislocation is coming out, so you have the front loop very in the grain boundary on the bottom. When you unload, these guys will come back, but since the path is huge, it may have some cross-slip and reach another place at the surface. Not the same another place there. So it will not remove the step. Hi, Prita. So if it doesn't remove the step, it means that you will have a higher irreversibility for deeper grain. Okay? So the deeper the grain, the worse it is for the life of the material, fatigue life of material. This is a first example, okay? Then we can do the same for many other parameters. Here, for example, is the plastic strain amplitude. Here 10-3 and here 1.6 times bigger. Of course, the more you apply the strain, the worse it is. The more you create irreversibility. Here is the loading state. If you are pure shear, you have this behavior. If you are double glide, it's a lot more complicated for the material. It's more irreversible, so more damage. And here's the mean plastic strain. So now we are applying a strain which is not oscillating between 0, but it is oscillating between a value which is non-zero. For example, a positive value, 0.3 or 0.5 here. So if you have a mean strain which is non-zero, it is more damageful than a zero mean strain. Okay? So this again is just comparative study of DD. And I think this is how you should use DD. You should not say, okay, DD is reality, this is what is happening in your material. It's not like that. What you should say is, you should first fit on an experiment, as I showed you. You fit your DD so that you are confident that it works more or less. And then you change your parameters to say, to explain to people what is the effect of such a parameters on their behavior. Not to say, I want to reproduce exactly one by one what you did. This is too much complicated. It's better to use it, to have it nicely working for a given point, and then you change parameters and you see the effect of parameters. I think this is how we should use DD. So finally, the shear stress at the surface is evolving with many parameters that we investigated, like the aspect ratio, plastic strain amplitude, mean amplitude, and then the loading, like this such relationship, okay? Again, the square root of n is there, okay? Now I want to know if this will create a crack. This was my question. Is this possible that a crack appear during that loading? So here to do that, I want to compute stresses and energy in the band typically. So this is my band here. I zoom on it, and this is my energy I compute. So energy is computed like sigma epsilon. You see the double contracted product between sigma and epsilon. So in our case, we have sigma. So we'll take sigma, c minus 1, sigma. Okay. We replace epsilon by c minus 1 sigma to have just in function of the stress. The stress, we have it everywhere. So this is the stress tensor to the squared, like this. And you see some highly energetic zone here, which corresponds to the dipoles. It's exactly the place where you have some multiple, those are the prismatic loops. Prismatic loops are located at that place. This is why you have a large energy at that place, large stress. So this is the dipole, they are like this, okay? Now if you make some statistic out of it, you can compute the frequency at which you have a given energy in this mapping, okay? Then you can do that for cycle number 5, which is the empty point, or later on, which is the dark points. What you can see out of that is two quantities. First, the average quantity, then the maximum quantity. You see, out of a Gaussian distribution, you can compute what we call the mean, the average, which is here. So the average here for later on is here. So the average is decreasing. It means that the mean energy is decreasing with the cycling a little bit and then constant. So the average decreases, whereas the maximum that you can take as the average plus the standard deviation, the maximum here is increasing with time. So it means that you have more and more energetic zone area in your material. So after a given number of cycles, I'm sure here you will have enough energy to open a crack. If this is continuous, you will have something enough to open a crack. Okay? But to open a crack, you need to have some stress component to open it. So the stress component, I just showed you here some picture of it. So it means that you have the crack. To open it, you need to measure the stress that is able to open your crack, to separate the slip planes like this, like as it is experienced experimentally, as it is observed experimentally. So let's do the same analysis. We compute the stress state in the channel. So same plane, but now this is the stress tensor that I compute here. I can make the same statistic about the tensor, But then I will derive two quantities, either the shear or the normal stress. The shear stress, localized here, is always increasing. So this is just because you have more and more dense dipole. The dipoles are denser and denser, so the shear stress, which is cumulative shear stress of the dipole, is always increasing. If you look now at the opening component, the one that would open the crack, it is not increasing, it is saturating. So it means that no, the answer is no, for my simulation at least. I cannot open the crack at that place because I have not enough stress to open the crack. The stress is too low to open the crack inside the persistence band. It will never increase. If it was increasing, I would say yes. No, here it's not. So my conclusion is that no, the crack could not be located at that place. You have enough energy, but not enough stress. Not opening component of the stress. So if it's not nucleated in the band, where is it? It will be at the surface, actually. Why at the surface? Because if you look at my extrusion, the thickness of it is more or less a constant. This is the thickness. The thickness of this is evolving and then constant. But the height of the extrusion is proportional to my irreversible parameters. It's always bigger and bigger. So you have some things which are bigger and bigger, more and more elongated. If they are elongated along the Burgers vector, typically, it means that when you apply your stress, it will have some stress concentration here and there, just because of the shape factor of your extrusion. And these stress concentrators will nucleate the crack. It will give the opening component that you do not have inside the band. You will have it at the surface. Okay? So the scenario is the following. We are close to the end of the talk. The scenario for the crack to open is as follows. You have your persistence band with the extrusion at the surface. It looks like that. All those are taken out from DD, okay? It's not a plot we did by imagination. This is DD modeling. You have the extrusion, intrusion shape like that. You have your multipoles, which are moving like that. You have your highly mobile dislocation at the interface. So what happens is after a given threshold, after a given shape of your extrusion like that, when a set of prismatic loops will reach the surface, many prismatic loops here, when they come to the surface, they will give the energy here, locally, enough to open the crack, plus the shape factor will give you the stress component to open the crack. This will open the crack, okay, and then it will damage your material. In reality, it's even worse than that, because you should take into account the oxidation of your surface. We don't have it in the code. We don't have any oxide at the surface. In practice, there are oxidation of the surface. So it means that every time you create a fresh step of the surface, some oxide comes and contaminates. So it means that it is very difficult to reverse the load at the same plane. In my case, I can remove the steps with no extra cost. In that place, we should take into account some kind of, like in your exercise yesterday, like a gamma APB, for example. If there is some surface energy that should be taken into account. We don't have that here. So I'm sure that in practice, the threshold is even lower, because when you do that, it's a pre-crack. It's like a pre-crack that you introduce in your material. So that I think is even worse for your material. It will crack sooner. So finally, from that, if I take out the relationship I gave you before, I can define the number of cycles before the first crack to appear, initial cycle number, that will follow such a relationship. You have the plastic strain amplitude, the plastic strain average, the loading, the grain size, and so on. So I have such a law where you have the shear stress also, which is appearing. And this is now a law that people are using in FEM modeling. In FEM modeling, they say, okay, I know that the crack will appear with a number of cycles which depends on those parameters. So they put that as the damage criterion in their model, thanks to that study. Yes. According to our study, yes. Oh, okay, because be careful, this is a single grain. So triple junction grain boundary we didn't investigate. So maybe this at that place you may have also extra concentrators that may do the same. Yes, I agree. Here it's the case of a single grain isolated, so there is no neighboring effect here. That's another study. Maybe I will show you that also. Now we have the capability to do the same in polycrystalline, so with different grains, but we didn't do it yet. We have the tools, but we don't have the hand to do it. But polish the sample, yes. Yes. Of course. Yes. exactly. So if you want to see that experimentally as they did here, you should have a cross section. This is a cross section of this, and you can see that indeed they find the crack at the interface. You see this crack here? Yeah, it's exactly where I expect it to be, at the interface of the bond. Yeah. Okay. And tomorrow I will show you that we can do that in DD. You can put the crack at that place, and you will see how it can propagate that crack. That will be the story of tomorrow. Okay. I just have 2 slides to conclude. So I wanted to show you that this gives also phenomenological relationship that you found in textbook. Typically, we can see that the number of cycle before, let's say, the irreversibility, so the crack initiation, will depend as the square root of number of cycles and linear with the plastic strain amplitude. This is known as the Manson-Coffin relationship in fatigue. So we found it naturally by the DD code. So it means that the number of cycles before the first crack to appear versus the plastic strain amplitude, which is given here, follows such a law like that, a squared relationship. And this is the effect of the diameter. So depending on your diameter, you will take more or less time to crack your grain. Okay. So here you have the diameter dependence of your fatigue life, I would say. Okay. So that's something you can put in modeling. Okay. Based on our study where we change that. Of course, depending on some materials, you may have or not a crack. It depends on the limit you put. But this is what happens. So finally, this is my conclusion. This is a picture that was published by Plantu a few years ago. So this was a debate in France we have between pro-nuclear and against nuclear guys. And these guys say, oh, this is what I fear the most. There is a crack. So the crack is between the two, between the no and the yes. So indeed, there is a crack. Well, this was just for fun. This was just a joke. So what I show you today is, this is when you look at the crack advance, this is the crack length and the crack velocity. Here I just showed you what is the initiation stage, when the first crack initiates. Tomorrow I will show you the next 2 stages. The first one is when the crack grows inside the grain. So the first crack propagation up to the first microstructural barrier. What will be the first microstructural barrier for the crack? What do you think? When the crack moves, grain boundaries, exactly. So tomorrow we'll see what happens when the crack moves up to the grain boundary. That will be the next part of the study. And just after, I will show you next, when the dislocation, the crack reach the boundary, how can it propagate to the next grain? So this we just investigated 3 years ago. This is a new investigation we performed. This was 10 years ago, and this is very recent. Okay. So I will stop here for today. The remaining part will be tomorrow. Maybe I can still put my joke, if you like, the joke. And I'm happy to answer your question. Is it okay for the time? I didn't check, by the way. Yeah, it's perfect. So let me know if you have any question regarding this lecture. This was crack initiation in fatigue. Okay, this is one for me of the most beautiful study we did with DD. Okay, thanks to Christophe Després. He was the investigator, the main PhD student, and my colleague Christian Robertson in Saclay. Okay, it's not my work; it's their work, I would say. Okay. So I would happy to answer your questions. Yes, dipoles, yes, sure. Yeah, yes, correct. Mm-hmm. Yes, right. Yes, sure, yeah, that's true. Yeah, yes, I agree. But then to stay at that place, the cyclic load will keep it at that place, yes. In our simulation, it will be always at the place of the vein structure that you will have these prismatic loops. They cannot nucleate spontaneously. They are always located at that place, yes. Because of the local, but yeah, because of the recombination of the dislocation with this vein, yeah. This is what we observed. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but that's something we should think about. Yes, I agree. Although for monotonic loading, maybe yes. Yeah. But in monotonic loading, you have less dipole, maybe. So you need first to have this vein, these dipoles, and then you will get that, yes. Any other question on yes? okay. With the parametric study, this one or shit. This one here? The upper one is when you have double glide configuration. So it's when you are the two systems are active the same way. So they interact a lot. What do you mean? If the stress is lower than what? So it means that here to get this is number of cycles. So after 5 cycles, this is my irreversibility for single shear. Here I have a much larger irreversibility. In other words, it means that the extrusions are a lot higher. You have more height. The extrusion height is a lot bigger. It's about 2 times bigger, factor 2. No, this is the ratio. So they are not the same. Here I didn't give tau. Tau is not given here. Tau, we saw that in the first slide. Here is about 200 megapascal, and here is about 100 megapascal, if I remember right. So it was if you want to look at the value of tau, those are the two values. One was 200, and one was 300. Those are the two values, okay? So the one is 300, one is 200, so they are not the same, okay? But they don't lead, because what is constant is not the stress, right? It's not stress control, the fatigue test. It is strain control fatigue test. So the stress is not imposed, okay? So here you have 300 megapascal, here you have 200 megapascal, okay? In the sigma. But, exactly, okay? Another question? Hmm? If where they form, you mean randomly in the sample? What do you mean? Yeah, this I don't know. You saw. I can show again the movie because I think it's a nice movie. The good point is that this does not depend on where you put your source. At least that's a good point, because if it was depending on where I put my source, then I should do I don't know what, but it's artificial. My location is what I want. So this does not depend on that, and it's clearly what you see in the model. So the model was given here. So if you look again at that, unfortunately that's the only movie we did in 3D like that. My new student is doing a new movie on that. You see that the dislocation was somewhere here, but here you will develop a plane which has nothing to do with that one. And I cannot say that at the middle you have more. Maybe you do, but I'm not sure. Statistically, the bond is longer at that place because you are close to the diameter. But so you may have more extrusion inside, but I'm not sure. Okay. So you see clearly this. I love this shape. You can see the fatigue clearly how it works. This is just due to plastic step calculation here. That you can see that. You see my dislocation was here, or maybe even another plane. So it has nothing to do with where the plasticity is localized. So that's the good point. So this is what I gave you here is a kind of summary of the PhD. At the beginning, we were not so smart. We put 12 dislocation systems, we put sloops everywhere, but we realized that we don't need that. A single source is enough, actually. But this took a year to figure out that we could take only a single source. If you take the 12 source system, you will have a lot of debris everywhere that will be here, but for nothing. They don't participate to the irreversibility. Tomorrow I will put those systems for the crack propagation, and you will see what they do, but not much effect. Yes? This case here. Yes. Oh, those are. Anyway, I don't know what is the interaction, but what I would say is what is important is the gradient. Actually, I can do it another way here. If I put my slip plane, to be sure that everybody understands, if I have my gliding dislocation that way, the plane, okay. If I put a dislocation just above the plane, let's put it that way. This is a prismatic loop which is not in the plane, a little bit above. Just because of that, here the interaction is strong. Here the interaction is a little bit strong, but less. Okay, so this force is maybe that way. This force is the opposite, but less because it's elongated. So globally, the dislocation will move because there is a gradient. There is not a change of sign, but at least there is a gradient. and the gradient will sweep the dipole. Okay? For the two on the side, of course, yes, sure. Yeah, yeah, sure. I agree that these two also interact, and maybe there's a big force here and a small here. And but I agree, yes, I see what you mean. So maybe, yeah, this maybe it's not symmetric. Yes, this I don't know. Let's try next week. Let's try it, okay, and we can check this. Yeah, okay, I agree. I see what you mean. Yes, that's a good point. Yeah. But in our case, typically, yes, no, but that's true. That's true. I agree. I agree that this should be globally, if this is this one, this should be the same force. They should have the same amplitude. Yeah. And but this is the bigger, so maybe it sweeps or not. But there is a study from Bacon, I think, that they did it. Actually, this sweeping mechanism depends very much on the velocity of your dislocations. If your dislocation goes slowly, you can sweep your prismatic loop. If it goes fast, you can move and detach. There are all possible mechanism occurs, and you will see with NuModis it works. We found that also. Okay. So I don't explain this, but the idea that it will create a gradient, and the gradient will move the dislocation. That's the idea. No question? Okay. I stop here. Thank you for today, and see you tomorrow.